Lennie Goodings is chair of Virago Press, part of Virago's management buyout team of 5 who created a newly independent Virago in 1987. She became the publishing director in 1992 when Virago was sold to Little Brown in 1995. Goodings remained the publisher and editorial director. She became Virago chair in 2017, still editing and commissioning her authors. A graduate of Queen's University, me too.
Oh, nice.
She was awarded an honorary doctorate by Queen's in 2004 for services to women's literature. She was born in Cornwall, Ontario, and working with authors and books is her passion. Welcome to the Bibliophile.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
And we're here to talk about your memoir, A Bite of the Apple, A Life with Books, Writers, and Virago. And it starts off with you full of excitement going to London because you longed for a relationship with that city and its booksellers and publishers. How come?
Well, I'd studied English literature at school and also at university, but I mean, probably it even goes further back, from books I read as a child and a special book particularly that I read as a teenager called 84 Charing Cross Road.
Yeah.
Which was a book about a girl from the New World, American, in fact, who had a relationship with these funny old gentlemen in a bookshop on 84 Charing Cross Road.
They made a movie out of that, right? Hopkins? Wasn't it Anthony Hopkins?
Yeah, Anthony Hopkins was in the film.
Yeah.
That's right. I've never seen the film, in fact. I just have the vision of the book. And now we publish the book. That's what's so nice at Virago. So I had that in my mind, and then I worked in a bookshop on the west coast of Canada in Victoria, on Vancouver Island.
What's the name of that bookstore?
Then it was called Borough Grove. It was set up by an Englishman named Ed Haythornthwaite. It was from the Jabberwocky, Lewis Carroll's All Mimsy are the Borough Goves, but he thought to put an R in for Grove to make it a bookshop. Don't know. Anyway, it's not there anymore. It was on Centennial Square, and he had a Canadian wife, and it was really just the three of us. When people from the bookseller or from the publishers started coming into our bookshop to sell us copies of books, or to say, are you interested in having authors or everything, it was really the first time I just clicked, and I thought, oh my God, there's actually an industry here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where I thought books came from, but I mean, obviously I knew there were authors, but I didn't really know that there was a book industry. And up until that point, I was pretty panicked about what I would be. So at the time, I was working as a waitress during the day in the spaghetti factory in Victoria.
I know the spaghetti factory. They had great bread. I used to eat the bread before the spaghetti came.
That's it. Well, I think that partly was the idea, to be honest. It was a fast food place, turnaround really fast, and they played very frenetic music. So all of us waitresses and waiters would run like crazy. In fact, I asked them one time, I said, is there any chance you could just lower the tempo of the music?
Yeah.
And the fellow who ran it said, no, never, because then you guys will all slow down. So it was very frenetic. So I did that in the evenings. And then during the day, I worked in this bookshop with Ed Haythornthwaite and Elizabeth Haythornthwaite. Right. So it was really, wow, night and day. In fact, when I went to, I didn't put this in the book, but it was very funny. When I went to my interview, Ed, who was a big smoker, sat in the back room of the bookshop, and he quizzed me. He handed me a book, which was a book about pottery. And he said, tell me, when was this published? And, so I had to look in the front and find the copyright page and everything. And he stood there smoking like this and put a telephone book on fire while we were talking. I remember, it was smoking, and I remember thinking, will I get the job if I say you're about to put the house on fire? Or will I have shown you up? That's pretty out of control.
So what did you do? What did you do?
I did get the job. I told him. I said, the telephone book's on fire. But he was also a funny Englishman in the sense of anytime there was anything panicky, which often is in a bookshop, he'd always say, let's make a cup of tea. So it was very, very funny. A funny introduction to that old style English. But really, the point of that is that I began to see that there were people behind the books, the people who were making decisions about what got published, what it looked like. So I said I wanted to go to England, and Ed, in fact, was very, very much promoting that idea. And he and Elizabeth both said, "Oh, and you'll see foils, and you'll go down Charing Cross Road." So it was, it was immediately built up for me. But I actually had always wanted to go to England. Apparently, when I was 4, I said I was going to England. I don't quite know why. But
it takes a lot of balls to do what you did.
You're right, but you know what you do when you're totally right. Now I look back and I think, oh my God, who were you? But when you're 24, you don't think like that, and that's great. I mean, that's the good thing I think about youth is you're not blessed with fast forward imagination in the same way as you are as an older person.
Yeah.
And so, what I just thought in terms, I bought a ticket for a year. One of my friends, I said I was going for 6 months, and one of my friends said, "You'll never last 6 months." So I said, "Okay, I'm going for a year." So I changed my ticket. So I was very challenged by that. I thought I'd stick for the year, but I didn't think beyond the year. I just thought I'll have a good time. I'll try all sorts of things, and then I'll come home and get a proper job. If somebody had said to me, "You will spend, the rest of your working career in London," I would have leapt from the plane. No, I didn't imagine anything beyond, the next day, which I think is a great thing about being 24.
Sure is, yeah. Well, again, and I get that sense off the page, I get that youthful adrenaline off the page. And so you land a part-time job with Virago, and you're interviewed by Carmen Callil. Can you tell me about her?
Well, she was legendary, but I didn't actually know that because it was pre-internet, of course. So, all I could see was there were some books out there that I thought really looked amazing. I could saw the apple on the spine, and I thought, well, here's an enterprise that's doing something really interesting. It was 1978, I think, when I first met her, and there was a lot happening in feminism. The Spare Rib had been founded and hit the streets in the Feminist magazine in 1972, the Ms. magazine in America the same year. And so there was a lot of change in the air. The company I first worked with was a publicity company, and it just didn't feel to me like it was having much relationship to what was happening in the world. And I felt I was living in a collective house, and, we're examining all sorts of traditions and overthrowing a lot of them. And I just thought, I really want to be have a job that is part of that. So I wrote to Virago, and I had done a year of publicity work in a company, a little publicity company, as I said. I didn't know that Carmen had run her own publicity company for 15 years. So I wrote to her, again, this kind of incredible naivete of a young Canadian. I wrote to her and said, "I think I can help you." And
that's right.
Not knowing that she knew way more than I did. But anyway, she obviously liked that kind of chutzpah.
But what was she like? Who was she?
She is still the same person. I mean, she calls herself a seething pot. And she still is that person. She's outraged by unfairness. She's just written a really interesting book herself called Happy Days, Oh Happy Days, which is about the working class system here and in Australia, where her family was deported in the 1800s, I suppose. She's got a lot of energy. She has a feeling that she can make change. I think that was the thing.
Kind of a mission?
Definitely a mission. But also, a lot of people feel cross with the world, don't they? And, write letters to the editor or whatever, or, just grumble to their friends. But, Carmen is a person who really, comes up with the idea, okay, women need a voice. Women need to see themselves on the page. Women need to be in charge of making their own decision about what gets published. Okay, I'll do that. That's the kind of person she was, and that's the kind of person she is at 82.
You early on say that a connecting thread in the book is tension. And you've just referred to a seething pot. But the book doesn't put its foot into that pot.
Well, let's get a perspective on this. I've been at Virago for 43 years. I worked with Carmen, who set up the company, and who left to go and found Chateau. in the 80s.
Shadow and Wind it wasn't
Shadow.
it wasn't found. It's a much older company than that.
No, sorry, not to found, to run. Sorry, yeah, she was headhunted to go and head it up. I know what you're not very slyly trying to refer to, which is Battles Amongst Us. But the fact is that is true, but it's also a very small proportion of Virago's years, and we've been part of Little Brown since 1995, which is 25 years more. I'm happy. I talk a lot about the early years, of course, and they are the more, slightly precarious times because, would we survive or not, all those kinds of things. But it's only part of our story.
It is.
To make the story of disagreements, natural disagreements. Of course, if people feel passionate, I refuse to make that the center of the story.
No, I'm not suggesting it should be, but on page 36, you say, that's where we went. They're talking about the smelly little loo. We had one loo with a door that didn't reach the floor or the ceiling. That's where we went to cry when it was all too much, and frankly, it often was. It's tantalizing.
I don't know. I feel like I tell the story. I mean, we were all very passionate people. We were worried we wouldn't survive. The tension that I mean by is when I refer to the tension, it's not just between us. It's between trying to do ideological publishing, trying to have a philosophy, trying to override the gatekeepers. One of the other things I tell is a story when I went with one of my sales reps, and this is much later than the time you're referring to, when we were a small company in Wardour Street in Soho. And I go with our sales rep to Belfast in Ireland, and we're trying to sell, I was just there to observe and trying to sell in our books to this fellow, and he said, "We don't want your books. There are no feminists in Belfast." So that's the kind of thing we were up against.
Sure.
That was in the 1980s. Of course there were feminists in Belfast. But also one of the successes, I think, one of the reasons Virago has been successful and has lived this long is because we haven't forced a definition of what is a feminist book or what is a feminist reader. I wanted to say to that fellow, first of all, how do you know? And secondly, what's your definition? It's obviously incredibly narrow.
Yeah, I think that obviously that's a reason for your success, because if you do define it, there's so many different versions of feminism out there, aren't there? Not necessarily at odds with each other, but certainly they each have their own specific agenda.
Well, I don't know. I have a broader view of feminism than that. But I think the stereotype maybe that you're referring to is the sort of man-hater.
No. You reference it. Within feminism, there's women of color, there's gay, lesbian, there's transgender. There's all sorts of different...
I know. I mean, yeah, fair enough. But actually, my definition of feminism is more like someone like Rebecca Solnit. Do you know her?
I do, yeah.
Have you interviewed her?
She's on the list.
She's great. I love her. Her definition of feminism I would absolutely accord to, which is, she says, is to change how we imagine. In fact, I've even got it written down. I've got it stuck on the back of my book. Is to change how we imagine gender, rights, voice, consent, and equality. And, my view of feminism is that it helps everybody. It gets all of us out of the boxes. It gives all of us a broader chance of redefining what is successful to us. I mean, you can boil feminism down to, should women get equal pay for equal work? Should women and men be free of violence? Should women and men be educated the same way? I mean, I think those are the basic tenets of feminism, and now of most gender relations, and how we're not defining men and women in quite the same binary ways anymore, which I think is great. But anyway, what I think is it is an imagining a better world for all of us, actually. And I believe feminism represents that and is that.
Well, that's the other thing, too. I mean, if you're male and you've got daughters, you want the best world for them. You want everything.
And I think men can be feminists, definitely.
Yeah.
I have a son. I hope I've raised him that way, too.
The book is a story of marrying artistry, ambition, and activism. That's what the review in The Guardian said.
Yeah, I like that. Thank you.
Yeah, but doesn't having a kind of an agenda, like an activist agenda undermine artistry?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think the way I have always thought about the various strands of Virago's publications is, with fiction, I feel like there really isn't. I mean, I expect there are feminist novels, but I mean, I think if you have something that has that much of a sort of propaganda or a feeling that people should behave a certain way, I don't think it's going to be a very good novel. I mean, I think, novels...
Yeah, that's my point.
What they're great about novels is they explore the fact that we're very contradictory and full of paradoxes. And that's a great novel. So in fiction, what we've always looked for is just great women writers. There is no agenda. And then in nonfiction, we do have an agenda, and that agenda is putting women's writings and experiences and talents and unknown voices and breaking silence center stage. And so that's where we do biographies, polemic, poetry, cookery, gardening, whatever. Our belief is that women can write about anything. But there is definite agenda in our nonfiction, yes, but not in fiction. So I feel like activism can sit quite happily with literature. And also, I think if you look at something like the Virago Modern Classics, which was the series of originally 19th and 20th century forgotten novelists that Carmen started in 1978. Okay, so individually, obviously, none of those novels are political, and some are great, and some are just good, whatever. Some are funny, some are middle ground. But if you take them together as a series, what the series is saying is political, because it's saying women writers are worth studying, worth reading, and there's a female literary tradition that people hadn't recognized before. So, no, I think activism, literature, fun can all sit very happily together. I don't think there's a tension there. I think the tension is more in the marketplace, to be honest. How you bring ideas to a marketplace, that's, I think, is a challenge. One that I really love, actually, but I think the challenge between art and commerce is the sort of nub of a publishing house like us.
Yeah, let me just use some of your words here. Putting women's lives, stories, and words back into history, into print. That's the mission of Virago, or one of them.
Yeah, one of them. Well, to begin with, it was a lot of women at that time, on the back of the women's liberation movement, was finding women's history. And, one of the things that we discovered is that there have been other times when people discovered women's history or women's books, and then they went out of print, or they didn't get studied at school or whatever. So it yet again went under. So one of the things that we said is, let's keep these books in print, so that the next generation of women don't have to do the same job all over again. Although that still does happen. But so that was one thing, that was looking back to history. The other thing is sort of challenging the notion, which we still continue to do, is what is worthy of being in print. It's coming out of something, in those days, out of the sort of E.P. Thompson, The Making of the English Working Class, the idea that history isn't just a kings and queens story. History is a story of, ordinary people. But ordinary people often were ordinary men. So, again, shifting that over and saying women's lives are as important. The story of women's lives is as important. And also, crucially, for everybody. That it's not just an idea, which is still a thing we still fight, I believe, which is that there's still an idea that if a book is written by a woman, that it's for women.
Let's just look at, for example, the definition of what great literature is. I'm a man, you're a woman. I think that War and Peace is probably the greatest novel ever written. It's written by a man. The Red and the Black, I think that's right up there for me. Madame Bovary, Pride and Prejudice, I think that should be there. The fact is that a lot of women weren't given the opportunity to lounge around and write back in the day. And they weren't published, as you say. So my question is, this agenda of focusing on women writers because they haven't had a voice, are there great works that haven't been discovered? Is that what you're doing? Or do they exist? Or is there an agenda to make them available and call them great when they may not be great?
That's a lot of questions, there.
And that's exactly what an interviewer shouldn't do.
Give you 3 questions. Okay, so To answer your question about what is great, I'll give you my opinion. One of the things we were doing at the beginning, okay, so we're talking about 1978, which is a different period than now, that's for certain. So 78, 80s, what we were doing is finding women writers who had gone out of print. We were up against the fact at that time there was a sort of canon of English literature, and the women who were deemed to be great enough to get in that canon, and who decided what the canon was is your number one question there. But it was Virginia Woolf, Jane Austen, Eliot, the Brontes, and they were virtually the only women studied. So one of the things Virago wanted to do right from the get-go was say, look, can we just unpack that a bit? Who's telling you that that's great? And who says there's a canon? And a canon for whom? We published some writers who I would say are great, like Willa Cather, Edith Wharton.
Yeah, no argument there.
Who had been forgotten, actually, not necessarily in North America, but in Britain, had definitely been forgotten. And then, as I say, not all the novelists in that. Rosamund Lehman, I would say, is great, too. Rebecca West, I would say, is great.
Yeah.
Sylvia Townsend Warner. But not all of them are great, necessarily. Elaine Dundee, for example, had been a bit forgotten. The Dud Avocado, which is wonderful. Maybe, is it great literature? I don't know. But also, what is great literature? If it speaks to you, if it tells you something, if it takes you someplace.
Yeah.
It's not a helpful label, in my mind. If it's great for you, that's fine.
You've only got a certain amount of time in your life, though, so you do want critics to identify stuff that is really worthwhile reading.
Okay, that's fine, but who are the critics?
That's right. Now, so what are you saying, that men and women consider different works to have different qualities? Shouldn't a male and a female critic agree that War and Peace is possibly the greatest novel ever written?
I think you're getting over-focused in a kind of hierarchy. I'm not really interested in that. What I am more interested in is how things are perceived. So one of the examples I give in the book is the idea that there's a domestic novel, and that belongs to the female writer. There's a sort of hovering over a lot of women's writing that it's a domestic novel. And I give the example of a short story writer who was asked, what do you say to the accusation that your short stories are domestic? And she said, that's not a literary observation, that's a political one. And, I would counter that with saying things like, what is Colm Toibin writing? What is Ian McEwan, Michael Ondaatje, George Saunders even? When men write about what is the domestic or intimate love or families, whatever, it's not called domestic. It's called important.
I don't care what it's called, though. I just want it to be good. I want to enjoy it.
I'm really not quibbling with you. I don't actually think we are quibbling, to be honest. I think you're just trying to provoke me. But I'm not talking about what you think. I'm talking about a general perception of books written by women that even today are still more often thought of as being for women. And
Okay.
that's what I would say is the last, there's a lot of things people say, oh, why do you have Virago? It's not hard for women to get published. And I say, you know what? It's never been harder for women to get published than men, especially in fiction, frankly. It's never. Women have found it, the novel was originally more of a female form, wasn't it? And so it's not that. It's the perception that I'm talking about. It's how women's writing is perceived.
Well, there's a lot more female readers of novels than there are men.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, women write more, buy more, and read more.
Yeah.
And women are, on the whole, more generous readers in the sense that if you look at the book groups, for example, and see what women are reading, and they will be reading unbelievable range, and they'll read different genres, but they'll also very generously read, Ian McEwan as well as they would read Angela Carter.
That's not even the word.
Men tend not to return that favor, I'm just saying.
Okay, I'm going to quote here some idealism. Stories, histories, memoirs, rants, poems were like fireworks, rockets lighting up possibilities, blowing up old entrenched ideas. Words were going to tear down and rebuild the world. Now, that was you when you were in your 20s with this little independent, passionate press.
It was actually pre that. What I was trying to say, I mean, yes, that was us as well. But it was actually even just before that too, because if you think about Germaine Greer's The Female Eunuch, that was published not by feminist presses, that was published by Granada.
Carmen was the publicist on that, right?
Carmen did the publicity, that's right, for Germaine Greer's The Female Eunuch. They went to the same convent school in Australia.
Did they know Clive James, by the way?
I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, probably most, like most expats, you tend to know who's around, don't you? When I started doing this book, I thought, oh my God, do I have to take on all of feminism, the history of feminism? And then I thought, whoa, no, I don't. First of all, that's too big a subject, and other people have done it. So I thought, okay, no, my focus is going to be books in the book industry. But what I really came to see was that actually so much of feminism had started from books. And I was so interested in that, actually. And I was thinking, is that a kind of, could you say the same thing about Marxism? Could you say the same thing about the civil rights movement? I don't know, actually. I haven't compared them closely enough, but I was and I'm not going to compare them now, but I was very, very struck by the fact that the feminist movement came out of books to start off. And also, of course, that's also where it's also hits problems too, because of course it came out of the academy and the universities, which were mainly white, middle-class, educated women. And so feminism has taken a long time to get a broader footing than it did at the beginning. But anyway, so it was books that spoke to women. I quote A.L. Kennedy, the writer, which I love that quote so much, which is that a book speaks to your most intimate organ, your brain, And it's because, I also wanted to talk about that deep pleasure of reading, isn't it, that you obviously share too, which is the intimacy of reading, and the intimacy of feeling that someone's talking just to you. And it's partly where you read, isn't it, in bed, by yourself in a corner, whatever. But it isn't just that. It's because, the dialogue is private in so many ways, isn't it? So I could see why those early books, why people did talk about, Betty Friedan was before my time, but people talked about reading that book and just feeling like their head was blown off, that it really told them something that was going on in their hearts. And so I wanted to give that context, and that was the beginning of the women's liberation movement, and then the feminist presses with then women taking control of what gets published, who decides what gets published.
Yeah.
That was really key, because when I came to Britain, all the big publishing houses were mainly white Oxbridge men, and they were taking the decisions about what gets published. And it's just like that gatekeeper back in Belfast, decides, yes, I'll take that book, or I won't take that book. The publishers have enormous power. They reflect, you reflect yourself. It's like you hire yourself. You reflect yourself in your choice of books. And the only way to get a broader range of what is published is to have a broader range of people making the decisions.
Okay, I'm going to narrow this down to 2 questions instead of 3, okay?
Good work.
First of all, you're now with Little Brown, which is part of a conglomerate. How can you replicate that passion and that idealism today when you're basically just a colophon?
We were more than that. We were lucky, I have to say. I often say about publishing itself is a gamble. And we were lucky. We took a gamble on who we sold ourselves to. And it could have gone wrong, definitely, because when we sold ourselves, Little Brown was actually owned by Time Warner. But they were keeping a very arm's length on Little Brown in the UK and Little Brown in the States, too. And then Time Warner sold Little Brown to Hachette, and that's who we're now owned by. And we've been owned by them for years now. And that's a French media company. But the fact is, Little Brown, when they bought us in 95 rather, they knew what we were. We were fully formed. I think it's very difficult to grow. It would be difficult to grow an activist or a feminist press inside a conglomerate. I totally agree with you. But if once you arrive fully formed, they knew exactly what we were buying. And they are a company that really believes in a variety of voices and a variety of books. And so we have always been cherished. So they didn't try and water us down. They didn't try to asset strip us or anything like that, or, really control anything. We have the same restrictions that you do when you're an independent, frankly, which is you have to make money. in order to keep on going. So
that's right. But can you take the kind of risks that you did when you were an independent company?
It's in some ways you can take more risks because if people believe you and they trust you as an editor in a big company or a small company, you can take risks because you're more cushioned in a big company. In a little company, you are very beholden to certain authors to be making the money that year. I do recall us when we were independent, and then an author would bring up and say, actually, I can't deliver the novel until next year. And we were all, oh my God, we were so dependent on that.
Yeah.
Whereas it's harder to take risks in some ways for a small publisher. I mean, a small publisher takes risks in a different way.
They're bigger risks. You don't have the risk now because you've got the padding.
It's a different kind of risk, though. You're still risking, you're still believing. I mean, every book is a risk on some level. Of course it is. I mean, unless it's a complete copycat of something that's already been out there.
Yeah.
And even then, it could be a risk because maybe that bandwagon has moved on. So every single book is a risk. The risk comes more in how much money you pay, to be honest. That is the tougher thing. But a small company takes a risk in a different way, which is they take a risk they won't spend as much money, but they're taking a risk on talent. And a big company does the same. I mean, you've got the same kind of editors in both publishing houses, to be honest. And an editor is always excited about the next thing and always wants to push out something and always looking for a new thing. So I know this is an old conversation about, independence versus conglomerates, but...
Well, I imagine it's one that you certainly had too back in the day when you were figuring out what to do.
Yeah, for sure we did. And there were some, at the time, as I say, that Time Warner owned Little Brown, so there were people who didn't want an American to own a little British publishing house. And, though I was sympathetic to that, I did think, and this is how it's been borne out too, I did think that it would give us the next step up, and it did. We then suddenly had we had sales team that were devoted to us, we were bigger and we had more might, because the thing that's changed more, I would say, than publishing is bookselling. Bookselling, the landscape of bookselling is utterly different from when I first came into publishing. It had small independents everywhere. And, so you had a lot of different places you could put your books. Since I've been in publishing, it's got narrower and narrower and narrower. And there are, fewer gatekeepers, and there are more chain stores, and there's Amazon. So you need the muscle in publishing today. It's very difficult to get your books to the people. There's the change. It seems it's way more than how publishing has changed.
Well, you're right. I mean, in publishing, one thing that hasn't changed is the number of men who are leading the companies.
Not so much in Canada, though.
In England, I think, and...
Oh, yeah, no, in Britain, it's definitely back to that again. But I was very impressed by the Canadian publishing houses. I am impressed by the Canadian publishing houses, and, most of them are now run by women. And that is good. All I would say is you have to be vigilant, because that was true for us, too, about 10 years ago. The 3 big houses in this country were run by women. But that's not true now.
Yeah, it slides back, doesn't it? It's back and for kind of a tide.
Well, I've often talked about the fact that the feminist movements, or Black Lives Matter, whatever they're called, waves.
Yeah.
So, there's an implication in that right off the bat, isn't it? That it's going to ebb and flow. And certainly we know progress doesn't go in a nice straight line. So, yeah, I just feel, you can't, I know some people say, it's stop complaining or stop fighting or stop whatever, but, I just think it's far from secure, is what I've witnessed.
You write beautifully about the editing process.
Oh, thank you.
I love to edit.
I'm
going to read something out here. What is editing? It's sitting up at a table to read, paying close attention to every line and word, pencil in hand, to mark the places where one is bored or confused or excited or engaged. It's being preternaturally alert to one's responses to the text. And the only thing I would add is that's actually, for me anyway, that's the writing process as well. It's really, isn't it? I mean, when you're writing is rewriting.
for sure. But I think, the trick, it feels to me that, well, not the trick, but the main thing an editor has to do is get inside the head of a writer and help them realize their vision on the page. You can edit yourself, definitely, of course you can. But there are certain things that you will never see as a writer on your own. And I don't even mean repetitive words or anything, although you might find you have a tick all the way through, and only an editor will spot that you use the same adjective. But it's more that there's a lot in your head, and some of it hasn't got to the page. It's that sort of thing, isn't it? Or you don't understand the emphasis that a reader is picking up, or sometimes. And also, I find sometimes with young or new novelists, actually, they put too many people speaking. You know what I mean? I say, think of it like the theater. Only you can only have so many people with speaking parts. Some of them have to be just waving in the background. Mm-hmm. So an editor can help a lot on sort of getting pulling out what's inside the author's head. What Linda Grant talks. I quote Linda Grant saying, it's like, to begin with, it's like a bit like a mirage. It's all slightly shimmery. Every author will say the book they had in their head is greater than the book that ever made it to the page. So,
yes. That's the frustration. That's the tension.
Yeah, that is the tension. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And also, you grow tired, don't you? Writers, they'll go back and forth. I also put Linda Grant there too, actually, because I worked with her, and we went back and forth, and we enjoyed each other, actually, definitely, because it's lovely. When the editing process works well, it's really nice because it's very intellectually challenging. It's flattering to an author. I can say that now as an author myself. That somebody's reading you that closely and trying hard to understand you.
Yeah.
But I remember I said to Linda Grant, I think just one more thing, and she went, enough. I don't want to do anything more. You're wrong. And I thought, yeah, okay, fine. It's your book. That's right. It is your book.
Well, it's like you feel cared for.
Yeah,
as a writer.
That's right. But I'm beginning to feel the greatest thing in the world is to be understood. If an editor can do that, or a reader can do that for an author too. It doesn't have to be somebody that you even have contact with. But to be understood is amazing. To
be understood and to be heard.
Hi.
It's interesting, you mentioned this idea of looking for what's boring. I do that in these interviews too. It's like, this needs to be interesting for people to continue to listen. So how do we make it interesting?
Sometimes boredom comes because you're lost, though, doesn't it? I don't mean in an interview, but in a book. Sometimes, you've lost, there's too many people, or you've got confused with time zone and things. But I think... You're trying to help people make a book that holds you the whole way through. And obviously, if it's a thriller, it's holding you on a really high pitch, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I don't mean it's just that sense of holding the writer or the reader. It doesn't just belong to thrillers. It belongs to every kind of novel, isn't it? You need to feel that the writer has you in their hands and knows where they're going. It's taking you there. And you can feel a slackening. That's what I would say about the boredom. You can feel just like when attention drops, or, when they go meandering off somewhere, which is frustrating or whatever. Anyway, that's what I do as an editor, is try to be super alert. Super reader is the other thing I call it.
The other thing, too, as a reader, I'm going to be interviewing James Marsden, I believe. And it's the bookseller's tale. And after 2 pages, I knew that this was going to be a really, really good book, because it was so packed with fascinating detail and facts and quotes. And it was, I just knew it. And I think that's what, as an editor, you want to help your writer to accomplish.
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm saying is... and you're saying is that the relationship between the editor and the author, you're trying to accomplish something together. You're having a baby together. It's like a love. It's like love.
I have often said that the editor is like a midwife, helping to give birth. But the baby is definitely the author's. It's not the editor's. one has to be careful about where the ego lies there. Do you know what I mean? It's not, I have now written a book, but it's not, I found it really difficult. I must say, I found the stamina required to do it. I found the ego required to do it, that kept saying, yeah, I think this is interesting, as opposed to just, oh God. Anyway, sustaining your own belief in yourself is really hard, actually. And that is where an editor comes in, because an editor can say, yep, it's fine. You got a low point there, but you can fix it, because look at chapter 5. You're great there. Part of your job is slightly cheerleadery.
Yeah, it's like to convey confidence.
Yeah, that's right. I don't think you can it's difficult to have creativity without confidence.
I know an editor who refers to all of the books that he's edited.
Yeah.
He refers to them as my books.
Yeah, I know. There's there's a thing in publishing talking about my authors. I have to say, I definitely say it myself. Yeah, I feel jumpy about that. You can see why you do it. Why you do it is because even though publishing is very collegial, and there is a genuine feeling when books do well, even though it's not your book. Yeah, I think on the whole, it's a generous industry, and it wants people to do well. Nevertheless, it's a business. It's competitive in the sense of what authors you get, and who you get to publish, and how you publish well, and things like that. So my authors, it comes from that feeling like that you have to sell yourself as an editor.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah. What's the best thing that Jacqueline Norton did for you?
She asked me to write the book.
Okay, after that.
But that was a big thing, actually, because the thing is, I sat beside her at a dinner, and we talked about idealistic publishing. Actually, funny enough, that's how we got. I was thinking a lot about publishing idealistically, and she said afterwards, she rang and said, "Why don't you write a book about that?" And I said, "I don't want to do that." And then I kept bumping into her, and she would say, "Are you sure you don't want to write that book?" And so for over probably nearly 2 years, she asked me. And, and then I thought, you are the kind of editor I like, because that's what I do if I feel like somebody's got a book.
Well, she's going for it, right?
Yeah, you just keep on going. And then I thought, God, I'm a bit stupid. If somebody's asking me to write a book, of course I should try. Originally, it was going to be more industry, how you bring in ideas to selling books. But then I realized, first of all, I have a great story in being at Virago for so long. And secondly, I realized, back to, how you serve your readers. I just realized the only way to make readers enjoy this is to put yourself at the center. And I had a lot of problems with that to begin with, because, I didn't found the company. There's lots of us who've worked there. I didn't want to overclaim stuff that, all of us have done. So, in fact, some criticisms of the book I've read, which is like, there's too many people, too many name checks.
I like that. Yeah.
Do you? Thank you. No, I thought it doesn't matter. I don't care. In this case, I'm going to sacrifice a speed read against the fact that there's a lot of people that, you want to credit. Anyway, so Jacqueline, I say in the acknowledgements, thank you for asking me to write the book I didn't know I wanted to write. And she gave me the confidence to think there was a story there. She helped me a bit with the structure, because as I called it, a hybrid book, because I wanted to talk about my chapter about gendered reading. Why can't a man read like a woman? I wanted to do an intimacy of editing. I wanted to talk about courage that you get as a book reader and as an author. So, I had some themes that I wanted, but also I had to weave in this story, the chronology. I did find that was quite challenging, I have to admit, and Jacqueline was helpful on that. When I talk about Margarita Yourcenar, and I say I hope she's turning in her grave, because she didn't, she said didn't want to be published by the ghetto of Virago. Yeah. And I published her. And I remember Jacqueline said, maybe you could dial that back a bit and not have turning in her grave. Whatever. So I did, so it was that nice thing that an editor should do, which is just, are you sure you want to sound quite like this? So she checks, it's a check and balance sort of thing. But the main thing is she gave me courage to write it. Yeah.
Well, as you say, it's flattering to be approached and being asked to write a book, right?
Yes, it's unique, isn't it? I mean, It's not unique, but it is for many people, for most people, it's a unique experience.
Yeah.
So.
I collect publishers' histories, and I'm now getting into ephemera like sales catalogs and promotional material. And I love the fact that
Wow.
one of the things that you did to research the book was to reread old catalogs.
Yeah. 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 Because I never kept a diary. And I had a lot of press clippings and I had some letters from authors, but I didn't keep a diary, sadly. So it was going through the catalogs that made me remember, oh, yes, that's how we published that. And, that's when I published that. And then I had to do the thing that you do with a novel, really, is pick out bits that were interesting and I thought were representative. So obviously, everything we publish and everything we've done is not in there. But the catalogs were very focusing.
Yeah, but why was that? Because it just took you back and triggered things and...
Yeah, I mean, the thing I learned doing this book was that the subconscious is very alive. And if you put yourself back into a place, if you can sink down into a memory, an awful lot comes, and you're sitting typing, as opposed to just jabbering away with respect to somebody or thinking rather idly. If you're actually sinking down to something and then typing, trying to capture it, more and more comes, is what I discovered. I didn't know that. I was interested to find how memory and subconscious it really works in an interesting way, it seemed to me. And I would see connections and I would remember things that I didn't know that I still retained.
Yeah, it really is a kind of a self-revelation, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a cliche, but you learn so much about yourself when you write a book that you're the main character
luxury.
in. Yeah.
It's a great luxury to be able to find a narrative. I do think if you can tell a narrative of your life, people have said it's the definition of sanity, and I think that's correct, actually. But, most of us don't have the luxury of sitting down and discovering a narrative in the same detail that I've been able to do. I mean, it's a work narrative, not a personal one, but nevertheless, it is a narrative that makes sense of my life for me.
Well, and don't we all just tell stories to understand our lives?
Well, we do. That's right.
Just winding down here.
Yep, good.
Is it good?
No, I meant good because it's 3:00. I can see that's fine. No, it's not good. You're not painful. and who doesn't like talking about themselves?
You provide some nice, succinct thumbnail descriptions of some very interesting authors. So I'd like you to do that verbally. For us, Margaret Atwood.
So Margaret Atwood is my heroine. In fact, I think she's in some ways everything that Virago aims to be or represents. Funny, smart, on the ball, forever relevant, forever pushing, for breaking new ground, both in terms of books and in even mediums of writing online, etc. But for me, she was a special heroine because I first found her on the page when I was 14, and I read her poetry. And it gave a seminar. That's probably too grand. But anyway, I talked about her in my class and said, I think she's going to be important. There weren't a lot of contemporary Canadian writers at that time. This was 1970s in Canada. And it was really exciting to find a woman, a Canadian, and somebody who, was unashamedly being creative. That was really stirring for me, I have to say. So it was amazing. And then when I got to England, and then they announced they'd bought Margaret Atwood's Surfacing and The Edible Woman, and there I was going to publicize. I went on the road with her.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Oh my God, And even by then I had met some quite famous people in Britain, but I didn't, partly because I didn't know who they were. But, I wasn't daunted by them. And, I was in my early 20s, and you think, you're equal to anything. But when I met Margaret Atwood, I was seriously daunted. Okay,
so what was it like being on the road with her? Like what is she like?
So much fun. She's really a camper. You know what I mean? She's got, I would use that trooper camper, all those things. She would always help carry the books. She would always know, where you were going and, help order. She's just not a passive person in any respect. And, that was really exciting and fun. And she laughs. She has this great line, which is, whenever things were grim, like the food was bad or a book reviewer or interviewer had not read the book, or, things just didn't work out. And she'd always go, never mind, it's all material, which was her, and I thought, yeah, it'll end up in a book. And a lot of it does. No, she was good. She is good.
It's like she's a bit like a magpie. She's got such a broad interest. She's so interested in everything, and she, as you say, she picks up all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, she is like a magpie, a super intelligent magpie.
Well, yeah, magpies are super intelligent.
I know, but she's not a gadfly. Do you know what I mean? She's not a person who just knows a little bit about a lot of things. She knows a lot about a lot of things.
Yeah. I love the fact that she doesn't put up with any bullshit from interviewers, but she's kind of mellowing a bit, I think.
Well, I think she expects people to step up to her. Or step up to themselves. Maya Angelou would be another character who was like that. She brought her best, and she expected you to bring your best. And, I like that. You're absolutely right. It can be a bit, when we're used to people just being kind of, I don't know, not so demanding or not wanting the best and the most out of most people. Most people don't go around like that. But, I would say that, my two MAs, Maya Angelou and Margaret Atwood, they really, they both have that high expectation of themselves that they ask it of you to. Be worthy of yourself.
Self-respect.
Yes, and that's, I certainly got that from Maya Angelou, She always left us trying to be better. It's unbelievable to have somebody in your life who can snap you to that kind of thing, I think. Mm-hmm. It's unusual. I like that.
Okay, finally, Marilynne Robinson.
Marilyn, I love Marilyn. Another M. Yeah, my 3 M's. Although I love Sarah Waters and Sarah Dunant too. So I like S's as well.
You're using my, though.
My authors. My Marilyn. Is that what you said? Oh,
yeah.
My
M's.
Yeah. Yep, okay. I have to be guilty as spotted. Well, Marilynne Robinson, I think, again, it's a different, well, we don't need to compare intelligence, but she has a deep humanity about her. Mm-hmm. And funny enough, again, she has the same respect for human beings and individuals as some of my other authors. Some of the other authors I publish.
Okay.
Whatever, I'm caught fair and square. I write about her in terms of courage. What I've found by sitting beside her as people come up and get their books signed by her, or what I read and how people respond to her, is that she does give people courage. She gives them, again, a dignity. I think the other thing about Marilynne Robinson is possibly that people don't know she's really funny. Mm. Because, she's not necessarily funny on the page, although a bit funnier in this last one, Jack. Jack has a wicked sense of humor, but she really is, she's droll. She's got a real eye for what's really going on. I love that. And she's so, one bit of her is not of the world because she's such a deep thinker, but another, she's really of the world. She knows exactly what's going on politically, for example. So, I'm pretty blessed, frankly, is what I would say.
How does she give someone dignity?
I think she really sees people. Even in a really basic way, when I notice when people come to get their books signed, she really looks people in the eye. And even though it can be all crowded around her, that the person in front of her gets her full attention while they're having that conversation. But that's a sort of small thing. I think that's not a small thing, but it's a individual, fleeting thing. But where I would say, because of the way she writes her characters, the way she gives prominence and dignity to every individual she writes about. And her people are very ordinary, aren't they? They're trying to be good. And, I love the fact that with John Ames, she said, what I wanted to do is write about a good man. I wanted to see if you could write about goodness. I think that's really interesting because we do subscribe, don't we, to the devil gets the best tunes. Mm-hmm. And she wanted to write about goodness. And I think that's what she seeks in people. And she seeks it in her books. And I think we feel that when we read it. We feel individually recognized.
That's nicely put. I'm glad I pushed on that question. Okay, right at the very end of the book, One of Carmen's famous quotes is, "The power to publish is a wonderful thing." She's right. The excitement of bringing into the world something unique, a book that began as a glimmer of an idea, or writing that might give tremendous joy or even create change, that to me is a power of the deepest pleasure. So why's that?
It's about two things. One is it's helping an individual to realize something, and that's really exciting. To pull somebody along, or to give them the courage or the conviction that they can do something on the page. And then the second thing is to make that real. Put it in a book, put it on a jacket, with a jacket on the front, get it out to the people, get it out to the readers, to try and make a difference that way. It's amazing, well, I say power because it does come from a sense of having power to make a decision and power to do something with a book. But I would also say it's a great privilege.
But why does it give you so much pleasure?
Because you put something in the world that wasn't there before. You've helped create something. Possibly it's like planting a tree or something like that. You see a visible representation of your work and their work, and it feels like what I also feel is which I wish I'd remembered to put in the book, but I didn't. But I also remembered now that what Maya Angelou said to us one time. She said, you must be aware of the power you have as a publisher, because somewhere out there somebody will pick up a book that you don't know them, they don't know you. They'll pick up a book that you published, and they will find a friend. And I thought, yeah. I want to take that power seriously.
I think humans get the most fulfillment and satisfaction when we do create something.
I agree. And helping somebody create something is, that's pretty powerful too. It doesn't have to just be your creation.
Yeah, that altruistic urge.
Yeah, I would say it's altruistic because it's not you, but by the time you've produced a book, you feel, by the time you've collaborated on a book, this is why one says my authors and things like that, to be honest, is because it's not like you say my in the sense of I own it, but it's my in the sense that I helped create it.
Okay, so the book is A Bite of the Apple, A Life with Books, Writers, and Virago. And in England, it is OUP, and in the States?
In America and in Britain, it's OUP, and in Canada, it's Biblioasis, a great, feisty little publishing house that I really admire.
Yeah, I know them very well. Why did you go with Biblioasis in Canada?
Well, I kept the Canadian rights. OUP asked for world rights, but I decided I wanted to keep Canadian rights since I'm Canadian. And Anne McDermott, do you know her? She's a
literary agent. Yeah.
She led me to Biblioasis. She said, I think this will be a good match. And she's right.
She is right. And it was a very good read for someone who loves publishers' histories and memoirs, but also I'm sure other people will get a lot of pleasure out of it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for joining me. I've been speaking with Lennie Goodings, who is the chairman of...
Chair.
Sorry. Should I leave that in? You should, because it needs to be corrected.
Correct.
You are the chair of Virago, which is owned by Hachette, but is still fiery and independent.
In spirit, definitely.
Thanks again.
Thank you. Really nice to meet you.
Likewise.
Thank you for doing that. Thank you for reading it. Thank you for understanding it. I do mean it's very kind when it's very rewarding when people read carefully and try and understand. And so I'm grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye for now.